Hello and welcome to another episode of Off the Cuff. And for this episode, I just want to look briefly into symbolism, occult symbolism on having to do with Pearl Jam's first album, 10. And I've taken a renewed interest in this album recently, probably because of the research I was doing on Andrew Wood recently and looking into his death and thinking about the death of Andrew Wood and the rise of Pearl Jam in context of so many bands that got famous that had tragic deaths. And contemplating the idea of, a Faustian bargain being needed to be conducted in order for a band to achieve, to rocket to stardom. So I'm just sort of exploring that idea in the context of Pearl Jam, particularly the first album. Now, I wasn't a huge Pearl Jam fan, but I was a fan. I bought the album. I listened to it a lot. Never once did I consider any sort of occult imagery or themes. It was just music to me, and still is mostly. None of what I'm going to say here is intended to be absolutely conclusive or, trying to tell you, hey, I got it all figured out. I mean, these are just things I think about and I put out there for you to consider, and also to sort of add to a file cabinet of information that I could perhaps later add to a larger body of research in a larger topic. Now, before we go further, let's just do a quick review on one of my favorite symbols you see all over my video blogs and my written blog is the Eye of Providence here, which you see on the back of every $1 bill in the U.S. currency. So just notice you've got two parts here. You've got the lower half of the triangle, which ends up being a truncated pyramid, which means that the top is chopped off and the top is floating above, and that's the all-seeing eye. So this, this represents a higher level. You could say, the metaphorical God aspect, and this is the lower level. So this is, of course, where we're trying to get to. If we're down here, we want to climb the steps and get all the way to the top, and then we're enlightened. And that's why there's a corona around it, because it's bright, like the sun, like God, godlike. And in a lot of my blogs, I point this symbolism out. I look for it, and I find it, and, maybe I'm just putting it there with my overactive imagination, or maybe it's really there. And this was a poster that for the film War for the Planet of the Apes. And as you can see, I put a couple images here to show you what I'm trying to illustrate. Is that basically the function of this A in the word war ends up being a truncated pyramid. And the way this works is you can see the A has been made into sort of a block shape where the top is chopped off, and you can't really see the middle part, the part that actually defines it as an A. It's obscured by this ape figure. So what ends up happening is you only see the outside of it. So every part that you can see indicates that it's not an A at all, but a truncated pyramid, but you wouldn't think about that unless you were looking for it. If, I took this image out and I took all my markings off, you would just see the word war with a ape coming out from the middle of it. But that's the left side of your brain working, but the right side of your brain is seeing the shapes and the symbols. And the fact that the top is chopped off could symbolize that the all-seeing eye is above, where we can't see it. It's out of reach. So this is where we are, the physical domain, and we wouldn't really have access to that upper layer. So it's kind of a pun, the way they have the image arranged. And of course, sort of gives the impression of a square and compass, which is really just one triangle pointing up and one pointing down. And one more small bit of review here of occult symbolism just before we get back into the Pearl Jam album cover. To illustrate some points I'm going to make, this is the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, and it looks real involved and a lot going on, right? Not going to go over everything, but I want to talk about the number 10, of course, because the Pearl Jam album 10 is what we're talking about. So you see 10 is down here. It's the furthest down below. And as we saw with the, the truncated pyramid, the concept is consistent here in the sense that, the highest level, the tip point here, the 1, that's kind of like the goal is to get there because that's where everything is coming out of. Kether, the crown. And a crown is representative of a coroner around the sun because the sun is the brightest thing in the sky. So therefore the king represents the brightest individual in the land. And ideally with godlike powers, representing God on the planet. That's why they're our leader, presumably, right? Because they're the representative of God on earth. So 10 is Malkuth, the kingdom. 10 is the lowermost point on the tree of life. This is the Kabbalistic tree of life. It's a whole occult system that's, goes into Jewish mysticism. We don't really know how old it is. I used to study this a lot. I'm not really into it anymore, but I still have the knowledge in my brain. So 10 is called Malkuth, and this is represented by the Lord of the earth. Souls of fire, knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angels. So Malkuth is kind of like the perfect earthly correspondence to Kether, the crown, which is the highest, most unknowable, most I am Metatron, which is, I think that's the name of God in the Old Testament somewhere. Holy living creatures, union with God. Just very high, abstract, higher than most humans could ever even imagine obtaining. And it goes a lot deeper than that, actually. But what's important to understand is that 1 is the very highest, and 10 is the lowest, and represents the earthly realm. And then the other number we want to think about is 5, which is the 5th Sephirah here, and it appears on the pillar of severity. And what that means is, in this system here, this pillar is called the pillar of mercy. This one's called the pillar of severity. And of course, you want to get the perfect balance, and you want to attain, the balance of the middle pillar if you can. The pillar of severity, as it states, the number 5 tends to represent fire and war. Our hand has 5 fingers. In a clenched fist, we punch with our hand, and it's called Jebra, and it's the god of battles, fiery serpents, vision of power, energy, courage, war, strength. So now that we're familiar with those numbers in a sort of a occult symbolic kind of way, let's go back to the Pearl Jam album cover. So let's first talk about the name Pearl Jam. Now, I did hear this story about Eddie Vedder's great-grandmother, something about a jam recipe, and her name was Pearl or something. But according to Wikipedia here, Eddie Vedder debunked his own story in 2006, saying that the story was total bullshit, but that he did have a great-grandma named Pearl. And then there's this thing about Ament and McGrady attending a Neil Young concert where there was some long jams going on. So I don't know. It seems like there's this unspoken understanding that, it means something, but we're not going to tell you. So that, I'm the kind of person that goes, well, why don't you just tell us? Why are you hiding the name of the band? What's so weird about, what could possibly be so weird about the name that you wouldn't want to tell us? If you come here often, you know how I think, so let's just get right into it. I really thought about it, and when a name doesn't make sense, if you recall, Soundgarden, when they reformed a few years back, they went under the name Nude Dragons, which was a really cool anagram for Soundgarden. An anagram is a word that is created from another word. And the most rare type of anagram is one where every single letter is used to make a completely new word or group of words. And so this is what I came up with for Pearl Jam, because I figured I don't think it's even a real thing. I think this might be an anagram. So here's what I got. I got Reap, Lamb, J. Now, Reap, Lamb makes you think of something biblical, like the Lamb of God, right? So that's kind of interesting. But I couldn't figure out what the J stands for, but then I just thought about it for half a second longer and I went, Jesus. Reap the Lamb of Jesus. And if you think in terms of sacrifice, was Andrew Wood a sacrifice? Andrew Wood sang a little bit about, he made little biblical references here and there, but mostly Andrew Wood was just a very creative mind and person who made really cool things out of his limited whatever education he had or worldview. He hadn't traveled a lot in the world, but he had a way of putting words together that was really cool and artistic. But he did make little biblical references here and there. And if we think of Andrew Wood in terms of he was the sacrifice for the Faustian bargain in order for the rest of the guys to become famous, and the first Mother Love Bone album being called Apple, that's the Garden of Eden, right? The apple in the Garden of Eden, the temptation, you eat it and you get knowledge, and it all fits together. So that's just one possibility. I have memories of listening to this album and just staring at the artwork for a long time, and it has a sort of victorious feel about it. Something victorious, something positive, something triumphant, which was kind of a contrast to the other grunge stuff that was going on. I mean, Alice in Chains, their first single was called We Die Young, I think. And even Soundgarden had that kind of heavy edge, especially during that Bad Motorfinger era. Soundgarden got a little more clean and more commercial later with Super Unknown. But when Pearl Jam came out, I can see how people criticized it, like, oh, these guys, they're just trying to cash in on the grunge thing and blah, blah, blah. I don't necessarily prescribe to all that myself. I'm just saying that I can see that point of view because it's kind of an overproduced, almost overly clean recording. And even the band themselves don't like that original mix anymore. Even they thought it was a little bit too much. They killed the soul a little bit. Although it apparently remains their top-selling album, most commercially successful. Anyway, so what does it mean? So this finger is pointing up towards something. What's it pointing towards? Well, here, look at this big A in the background. And we think in terms of the truncated pyramid. And look, it's cut off at the top. Isn't that interesting? They chose a font that just happens to not come to a point. Well, so what? It looks good this way. It was just aesthetically pleasing. Why does everything have to have an occult meaning? Well, it's also kind of interesting the way their hands are arranged, almost like a pyramid. You see that? Pointing to the top, saying, look up there. What's missing is the pyramid that's right here, you see? There's also the fact that both A's in the name Pearl Jam are aligned just on the edge of this larger A. And if you've watched some of my other blogs, especially the ones I did on Star Wars occult symbolism, I pointed this out in one of those posters, how there are several reinforcements telling you silently with symbolism to look at the A and where it's cut off. And again, what's missing? The all-seeing eye, because it's invisible, because it's watching us all. And that's not the level that we are at. We are not equal with the illuminated eye. It is above us. That's why we don't see it. It's kind of a pun. And you see this watch here? Kind of like an eye, a little bit round. That's something I just noticed right now, actually. So now that you've got all that in your head, let's back up. And so how many band members do we have? We have 5. And the color is red and hot pink. But red is the number of, war and fire, as we just talked about. The 5 together as one, fighting together, this fiery warlike force, having reaped the Lamb of Jesus, striving towards this one thing. the all-seeing eye. And the first song of the album is called Once, has the word one in it, striving for the one. And finally, we take a look at the lyrics, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them, but I did want to point out the song Alive. Now, in another blog where I talk about Chris Cornell, I explained that Soundgarden, during the song Slaves and Bulldozers, there's a middle breakdown section, and when they play it live, Chris Cornell would start singing the lyrics to Alive. He would sing this first group of lyrics. He did that for many years, but he switched them after a while, and then he switched them with the lyrics of the song by Led Zeppelin called In My Time of Dying, which is pretty creepy when you think about it. So I just thought I would throw that in there, but it's almost like he's going, pay attention to this song. Go back and read the lyrics. See how it relates to Slaves and Bulldozers, maybe. I don't know. I never even thought to do that, to be honest. But I found out something about these lyrics recently that was kind of interesting. And it's this part here. Okay, so it's about a son who's finding out that the guy that he thought who his father was isn't actually his father, but that his real father actually died. And the lyrics are very straightforward about it. What you thought was your daddy was nothing but while you were sitting home alone at age 13, your real daddy was dying. Sorry you didn't see him, but I'm glad we talked. Now, this next line I never understood until recently. Oh, she walked slowly across a young man's room. She said, I'm ready for you. I can't remember anything to this very day except the look. I read recently that apparently Eddie Vedder said that this is about the man then having sex with his mom. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. She walks slowly across a young man's room. So that's the mom still, and the young man is the young man who just got told his real dad is dead. She said, I'm ready for you, meaning I'm ready for you, son. And then he says, I can't remember anything to this very day. For the longest time, I thought he was saying, I can't remember anything but this very day. Thinking, he's really happy and he's in the moment. But that's not what he says. He says, I can't remember anything to this very day, meaning his memory is blocked. And that's what happens during traumatic incidences. When you're a kid or when you're young, or even as an adult, if you have a very traumatic incident, sometimes your brain will delete the memory. But he remembers the look. Maybe the look on her face, Oh, you know where? Now I can't see. I just stare. So think about that. I can't see. I just stare. Imagine the look on his face. That's someone in a state of trauma, someone disassociating with their current situation, which is too shocking to deal with. But I'm still alive. He survived the trauma. So there's a lot of trauma you can feel in this album, a lot of catharsis, very similar to The Who. Same old formula. Meet the new boss, same as the old boss. Go back and listen to The Who. Go listen to Bob O'Reilly, and then go listen to the first Pearl Jam album. You'll see what I mean. Now, why this is interesting on another level is because I believe Andrew Wood may have been sexually abused when he was younger. I don't believe that because of any proof or any specific explicit statements made anywhere by anyone who knew him. I'm just putting it together in my head because it does seem he was abused as a child. His parents basically admit that in the documentary Malfunction. They don't give detail, but they say, they drank a lot and the family was fucked up. And the dad passed out drunk. Anything could have happened. Who knows? And let's face it, Andrew Wood was a sexually, let's just say, ambiguous person. And that's not to criticize him. That's not to say that he was any less of an artist. He was a very gifted artist. He's very creative. But sexually, I don't think anyone really knew where he stood, and I don't think anyone really cared to contemplate it too much. But, as a fan, I just think it's kind of a no-brainer to contemplate here and there. What's the deal with him wearing those dresses and trying to look like a woman on stage? And him wearing his mother's underwear and telling people about it again. This is information I got from the documentary Malfunction, the Andrew Wood story. And I feel like there are hints of incest in Andrew Wood's story. And I'm finding incest in Eddie Vedder's story too. So I just thought that was an interesting connection to make. Now, lastly, I want to look at this weird song, Evil Little Goat, which was on, I guess it was an outtake from the first album sessions, from the 10 album sessions, which was released on the 10 Redux, the reissue version. She was an evil little goat. She was an evil little... He brought her back from Scandinavia. She wore the mountains and the clothes were new. She knew the mountains like a little dangerous. She is the one. And she was an evil little goat. She was an evil little goat.
Bah, bah, bah.
Now, if I heard this back in the early 90s when I first got the album, I probably would have thought it was a funny joke song. But in context of everything else we've been talking about and looking at, it's making me think a lot more.